The writing was always so strong on the show for me. It was more about trying to understand it, because this character is very impenetrable and it's a tricky character, and to really try to make a clear through line for myself of why she's acting the way she's acting, and what that addiction does to your personality and how you appear, and her choices. And so it was a lot of conversations, a lot of work, a lot of reading, and a lot of fun to sink my teeth into.
Welcome, Rose. Thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on these 2 phenomenal series.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming out on a really busy holiday week, and it's cold and all those things. So you're really kind, each and every one of you, to be here and to watch this stuff.
Both these shows are so terrific, and they will absolutely warm you up, because I think that there's so much going on, and then they're both about women dealing with crossroads in their life in a lot of ways. We'll kind of talk about each of them separately, but let's start off by asking about what they have in common, Rose, in terms of their themes, or even you're working as a producer on both of them.
Oh, I think you put it well in that they are both kind of women at crossroads, one in a much deeper crisis than the other, obviously, but there's similarities in that, Sheila is at a rock bottom, and then sort of discovers this way out through aerobics, and in Platonic it's a far lighter, more exploration of that, but also a lot of people have related to that character, and to her crossroads of sort of, coming out of the early, grinding young years of motherhood to then, the next chapter, and trying to figure out who you are.
Right. What comes next, right? That's always the big question, is what comes next.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Physical. So one of the things I love about Physical, and it's such a terrific show, is that I love shows that look at character exploration and look at themes against a backdrop of a cultural moment. And I think that this show does it so beautifully. Sheila Rubin, obviously, she is undergoing this significant transformation in the series. Let's talk about the challenges and joys, I'm sure, of portraying such a complex character with a dynamic arc who's going through such a big, deep revolution in herself, right?
Yeah, I that was one of the reasons that I was drawn to the project, was the world of it. The character in a way can be the last point of entry as an actor, but the actual world was so fascinating, that tipping point of video coming into people's lives, and post, the second wave feminist movement, when a lot of women felt very disenfranchised after that, like not, ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment. So, and Sheila was a really specific character in that era, and Annie Wiseman, the creator, based on a lot of inspirational characters of that time, and it felt just so specific. And then to tackle this subject of an eating disorder, which is often, the butt of a joke in a TV show, or, it's not dealt with the sensitivity and in a way that you would want to see it, because it's so shameful and it's such a hot button topic. And back then there was no language around it either. There was no dialogue around it. And trying to sort of also look at this incredible burgeoning movement of the wellness industry, which is now, obviously, we are inundated with that on all of our social media apps. But back then it was a very, very new thing, this idea of exercise not just being a luxury that some people can do, but that everybody can do, and that it can be, a very life-affirming kind of thing. So it was a really complex, big kind of show in that sense of the themes we were looking at.
It is a big show, and let's talk about that for a second, because I often feel like sometimes people think that a big show has to sort of have this sort of epic tapestry. And one of the things I really like about that show is that it's epic, but it's sort of an interior epic, to coin a phrase, right? She is going through things that everybody goes through, including even self-esteem issues, and the notion of kind of reevaluating how she talks to herself, how she sees the world through various aspects and through her own eyes, right?
Yes, and the kind of the additional, what do you call it? Not trick, but like the voiceover in it, which is something I had never done before, and that was such a technical kind of experience for me to be having this inner life of the voiceover, and knowing that would be laid over the top of the screen, and then doing the performance in the scene, and how that sort of all tracked together in terms of, like, it was a lot of, obviously done in post-production and figuring it out, but that was a whole thing I'd never done before in my life, acting.
That's the subtle nuances of that is really interesting, I think, obviously, right? It's kind of recording that voiceover afterwards and kind of being aware of how you're acting on screen and what the story beat is at that point, but you're also kind of giving it a kind of different performance vocally, right? Let's kind of talk about that a little bit in terms of its nuances.
Yeah, it's interesting when people have really relate to that aspect of the show. It's a habitual thing of addiction, and whether it's food or sex or drugs or anything. I've had a lot of people who are in recovery from all those things relate to that and say that's how I talk to myself when I'm going through my addictive nature or my the terrible patterns you have in your head as an addict. And that was something I had to understand. And, Annie has been very candid with her own experiences with her ED. So that was something, she was very much my touchstone for kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, let's talk about the physical aspect of the show too. There's obviously there's physical comedy in it, but it's also obviously a very physical show, apt for the name. Yes. What was the challenge of kind of finding the character kind of even within the physicality of Sheila?
Well, she has a dance background. I'm deeply uncoordinated. I'm not a dancer. I'm more like platonic in that sense. Like so that was really challenging and very fun. I started training really early with Jen Hamilton. We were. Bobby was shooting 9 Perfect Strangers in Byron Bay in Australia, and the pandemic was right in the first fun 6 months of that, guys. Wasn't that fun? Oh, God, that was fun. And I was on that Zoom. When Zoom was new, it was like, you're going to Zoom with this person. So I would do a Zoom with the aerobics instructor, the choreographer, Jen Hamilton, who's terrific and a close friend. And we just started from scratch. And in a way, Sheila's starting from scratch, so she didn't have to be brilliant at it, but she did have a dance background, so we wanted to keep those elements of her posture and her composure that dancers have, and their sense of spatial awareness and things that are just innate if you've got that history in your body. And I loved it. Any chance to get out of your brain as an actor, because then you don't have time to be self-conscious. It's the best thing to do. If you're doing something with your body, then you're not making calculated decisions about your performance, which is so boring. Like, who wants to watch that? It's much more spontaneous if you really are, it's an interesting lesson that. So I very much, I loved it.
Yeah. And you mentioned the aspect then of second wave feminism and the entrepreneurship that goes along with Sheila's character.
Yeah.
That was an important thing too at that moment. And
absolutely.
Anybody who lived through those moments, you kind of you remember how important that aspect was to women's lives. It
really was,
right?
And women have always found the space of entrepreneurship in wellness, like Jenny Craig, Suzanne Summers, Kathy Smith, Jane Fonda, of course. Like, women have found economic independence through that wellness space, and that was something that this is really the seeds of that, and which was so fun to research and understand. And it's something that's not really taken seriously, but it's been a gateway for women to gain financial independence, which really they didn't even have then in the 80s. It was, you still had to get your husband's signature on a check to get money out of the bank in some cases. So it's like really is a different time, even though it wasn't, hundreds of years ago. It was still compared to where we are now. It really was. So.
You mentioned research. What did you do for research, obviously, besides maybe looking at some of the specific things that are maybe referenced visually? What was the deep research process like for you?
I mean, a lot of footage of that time, obviously. I've read some really extraordinary books by various women. I mean, and I talked to Annie a lot because she grew up in San Diego in the 80s and the late 70s, and a lot of it is, references to her own mother and stuff. So that, it was very immersive at the time. I unfortunately couldn't go to San Diego because of the pandemic until seasons 2 and 3, but so I would have loved to have done that more early on, but it was really fun. It was such a fantastic world to step into, and the production design was brilliant. And Cameron Lennox did our costumes in the first season, which were it's a funny era because it's made fun of a lot, and it's such a parody. It's so easy to make it look like you're in a costume and not in like an authentic piece. And so much of it was vintage, and I love all that stuff. It's so fun. So that was really helpful to get into the character.
Yeah. The show, I liked how the show is very subtle about it. It doesn't really kind of blare it in your face.
They had a really, which is hard to do, and then to also really set you in the time.
Right. Yeah. Not everybody had a mohawk, and nobody had not everybody dressed like Wham. Or
I know.
Yeah.
But then some people did, and it's like it is so over the top, that era. But it's a fine needle to thread.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of times Annie Weisman, the show's creator. Let's talk about kind of the experience of kind of collaborating with her and the writers and directors on the team. How collaborative was the process in shaping Sheila's character and working on the show?
I mean, it's funny, if you tell something to a writer about your personal life, it'll be in the script like a couple of days later. So you got to be really careful. Like, I want this to be on TV. I don't know. Like they don't just pick ideas off the floor. They're like always working. Like every TV film writer I've known and work, that's, you got to be careful, particularly in TV. But the writing was always so strong on the show for me. It was more about trying to understand it, because this character is very impenetrable and it's a tricky character, and to really try to make a clear through line for myself of why she's acting the way she's acting, and what that addiction does to your personality and how you appear, and her choices. And so it was a lot of conversations, a lot of work, a lot of reading, and a lot of fun to sink my teeth into.
And Platonic has aspects of this too, but I want to ask one last question on Physical in respect to the beautiful sort of line that you walk between comedy and drama on the show. You're great in both, obviously. You do both of them so well. And both projects like this that sort of have the elements of each of them kind of bleeding into the other. Was there a sort of a sense of making sure that that too much of one moment wasn't too comedic, or the drama wasn't too heavy? What was the conversations like with that, even with Annie?
I was always leaning into I'm trying. It's always more interesting to find something that funny in the drama. It comes from the same place, But working with Rory Scovel was really interesting, because he's a stand-up comedian, and this was only his first real dramatic role. He had other roles in movies and TVs, but that was really interesting to see him transition from always looking for the joke to trying to be kind of serious. But it was, the world of Physical, the comedy is far more subtle, and it's something I enjoy as a viewer, but it's a different kind of comedy to the one we did in Platonic, for sure. It's it's a far more subtle, sort of darker kind of tone to it, but that I will have an inward, I hope the viewers do too, kind of understanding of,
Right, and it's also one of those things where even the most dramatic moments in life, if you look at it the right way, it can seem pretty skewed and pretty comedic. Right?
Yes, exactly, totally. You can, look back at those, tragic kind of situations, and that's kind of what Danny's character is this sort of tragedy, this husband of hers, and how the humor of that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch over now to Platonic, and another great show and another great performance. Sylvia is obviously somebody who she sort of wakes up after 13 years, sort of realizes that she's put a lot of her life on hold to be a wife and mother, and Seth Rogen's character, Will, sort of is in some ways her opportunity to rediscover an aspect of herself in some ways, even though she's kind of resistant to it too. What were some keys to her for you in kind of figuring her out?
I think her acerbic kind of quality, and her, their relationship it's very kind of mean in a way to each other. It's a certain kind of friendship where they really take the piss out of one another the whole time, and to not hold back on that. But that was a key into her sort of dry, wry kind of look at the world, I think. It's a sort of a little bit tongue-in-cheek the whole time. And that for me was a real key. And then working with Seth is just always the most information I can get about a character, because it's all about us together. And that show lives and dies on the chemistry of those two characters. So without him, it wouldn't have lifted off, I don't think.
Yeah. And this is we're going to get onto that chemistry in a second, but I also want to say that one of the things that I think about, and if you guys haven't seen the entire season of Platonic, I highly recommend it, as well as all 3 seasons of Physical. And Platonic has just been picked up for a second season. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Very lucky.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. More TV, guys. More TV.
More TV.
More content. More content for everybody.
One of the things I thought, though, about in watching the whole season is that part of why she, in some ways, is a little resistant or will sort of rub her the wrong way is because that friendship is forcing her to reckon with who she is now and why she isn't the same person she was when they were friends long ago, longer than 5 years ago, right?
And that's only a reflection an old an old friend can give you that mirror. You know, there's only an old friend who's known you forever before you were this person, before that chapter of your life, before that they can really hold that reflection up to you, and it's very annoying because I think it's annoying to her because she's I'm not that person anymore. I'm this person. I have 3 kids, and it's like, and he's like, shut up, you know, like you're not. You're like a party girl, you know, and that was what I think was a really fun examination in the show, which is like I haven't really seen before in that sense. Is that it truly is a platonic friendship. It's not. There's no trick to it, and that was refreshing and something that I felt hopefully people would relate to.
Yeah, no, it's very relatable in so many ways. And this is a reunion with Seth. Obviously, you guys worked together on Neighbors and Neighbors 2, as well with Nicholas Stoller, who created the show with Francesca DeMar, his wife. Yes. Let's talk about why was this project like the one that kind of felt right, and in terms of reunions with those guys?
It was a sort of step by step. They reached out about something else which didn't work out, and you know, Nick gave me my break in comedy. You know, I did a little part in Get Him to the Greek, you know, years ago, and it was supposed to be another actress, and she couldn't get out of her movie, and so it was a fortuitous last minute thing. And I was on a show called Damages, which was very serious, not funny, and they, you know, were really cool. And him and Judd Apatow, the producer, would just like come in, and so I've long had a great and very, you know, meaningful in a way relationship with creative conversation with these guys, and so we've been trying to figure out something else, and then they had this like idea of this thing based on Francesca's sort of experience being, you know, friends with guys and what that dynamic, and I too have a very dear friend who is a platonic friend who's a guy, and just spoke so clearly to this experience I've had in my own life, which is not always a reason to do something that might not be interesting, but I thought there's something here that I haven't seen before, and that could be, and the world of it could be kind of funny and interesting and a good place to have some, but then it lived and died, as I said before, on who was going to be cast as Will. So that sort of, the conversation kind of happened bit by bit,
Right. So then with those conversations and with Seth, as you guys kind of talked about these characters, and maybe that was with Nick and Francesca, but as you guys kind of figured out where these guys were in their lives, what were some of those conversations like, Rose, and kind of making sure that they were in the right spot?
You know, Seth is such a, he holds himself to such high standards with his comedy. So as soon as he's around, it's like everyone rises to the occasion, and you're all like, and him and Nick have such a long historied relationship with writing and acting from years in California and in comedy. And so for me, as soon as we were all together, we had a bunch of read-throughs, and that's when really the conversation started to happen of like, what's our dynamic? We know we've got good chemistry, but how are we translating it to these characters and figuring out like all the various sort of ways we could do that? And that really started once we have it. They love read through, so you do read through after read through. Like that's sort of that's the rehearsal process, and then you can start to pitch ideas, what's working, what's not. And then with comedy, always the edit is it's so important. Things get cut, things are put in, and they figure stuff out. So, but I knew we had a solid base to start with, and then once we figured out that this friendship and what the dynamic was, we could figure out the funny.
Well, the two of you sort of like have a thing of you know, finishing each other's sentences, or he can kind of translate what Sylvia is saying if she's got food in her mouth or something, which I think is very funny. And there's also physical bits in here too, but a different kind of physical humor than obviously in Physical. There's aspects where you have to crawl through a dog door at one point, which you do with a plum, and really really beautifully done. But even like there's a moment when in a diner where you're sort of, he's talking about I don't want to ruin it for anybody, a certain moment kind of going too long and kind of like wrap it up, and there's sort of a physicalness to Sylvia that's character specific, right?
Yeah, I think it's, to go back to Physical for a second. What is funny about Physical is the aerobics, because aerobics in the 80s is just funny. It's funny. It's innately like comedic. Like all those videos are hilarious. Wow. They're so kind of this weird relationship they all have with the camera, and like everyone learning how to talk to the camera and do the exercise. Like it's so funny. Like that. Just to your point of like the comedy of that, I think a lot of it is really in that stuff, which was very, very fun to do. But the good thing about working with Nick and Francesca and is that they write to your strengths. And so they were like, we're going to give you all this physical comedy to try, for better or worse. And so it kind of went from there. And then once you're on set, it can just change minute by minute. They're like, try this, try that. Don't do this, do that. Put more chips in your mouth. fall over there, you know, like whatever. Like, so it becomes, but they started to, I knew that they were going to write me some really juicy, funny, comedic stuff to really sink our teeth into. And that's the joy of working with people who know you and know your strengths.
Yeah. And the same way Physical kind of has an aspect of it against a certain specific kind of cultural backdrop. There's a lot in Platonic about how, you know, once women are sort of on a certain track and if they get off of it, it's a certain way. There's, you know, are we seen? Are we not seen? There's you know, people walking by and all I am is a mom at school drop-off. And the way that can erode self-confidence and what you kind of become after that, right? Yeah. Let's kind of talk about how important those themes were to the show.
Really important. And, you know, I'm a mum. I have 2 kids. I'm at drop-off. I'm at pick-up. And so my friend Carla Gallo, who's in the show, who plays Katie, her best friend, like that's basically what real conversations that we're having. And it's just like granular stuff, but it's real, you know, and it's funny because it's real. So that was something that was like a very domestically kind of, you know, observation, but it is true of women, you know. People don't look at you, acknowledge you like they did, or look at you do just become this sort of cardboard cutout of a mum at times, and that's like as to your point, there is kind of a small erosion that starts. And we wanted to talk about that with a light touch, you know, to for people to relate.
Yeah, and going back into the work, into you know, the workaday life is an aspect that Sylvia has to deal with, and the generational differences, and after being away for so long, what that sort of thing is like, and what is now acceptable in a lot of ways.
And that was so fun. That platform of her. There's an episode she goes back to being a lawyer and gets a job, and it goes, needless to say, terribly. And it's like, and she's surrounded by millennials and she can't understand them and she doesn't know what they're talking about and she's like 50 steps behind the whole time, and it's like, and then she makes a mistake and she can't figure out how to fix it, and it escalates to this, you know, kind of hilarious thing. And the funny thing about Sylvia too is like her pride. She's a very prideful character and she doesn't like to admit stuff, and she's like very self-contained, and that's really a funny kind of quality of a character to have, that she's not willing to back down or admit things very easily. There's not much vulnerability, right. And that was very fun. That was really fun to play.
Yeah. And in fact, at one point when you makes a certain faux pas, tries to pass it off as being, well, that's because I'm from Australia, and then another Australian coworker says that's not.
It was so stupid. I know. She makes some really bad joke that's like terrible in the office room when everyone's chatting, and then she tries to say it's Australian, and then this woman comes in and is like, "No, it's not. I'm Australian," and you know, it's so stupid, but it's funny.
Right,
Yeah.
Right. I'm expecting you guys to be like, "Well, what part of Australia are you from?" Oh, no wonder.
I could do a whole 20 minutes on that. Yeah.
You're an executive producer on both these shows, Rose. How did your role influence maybe the creative process, and kind of how was the experience of being a producer on these shows?
I loved it. You just get more of a seat at the table in terms of the storyline, the casting, the look, all the bigger decisions that you can be more left out of if you're not have a producing side to it. So that I have enjoyed it immensely, especially working with these great people. I've been so blessed with both these shows to work with my friends Nick and Francesca and Seth, and then with Annie Wiseman, who was extremely collaborative about that. And that's been, I've been doing this for so long, so it's so lovely to have that communication with people and to have that creative conversation. It's been very lucky.
Yeah. By the way, we've mentioned him a few times. Let's have a round of applause for Seth Rogen and, who's phenomenal in the show, and Carla, who's fantastic, and Rory Scovel, all your co-stars on both of these shows.
Yeah,
right?
They're terrific. I know, I've been so lucky. Both jobs. We've had great, and in season 3 of Physical, we had Zooey Deschanel join the cast, and that was just a delight. And she plays such a weird character who's so entertaining and like nothing I've seen her do before. And I just had such fun doing those scenes together. They were really just such a pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, just to bring that up for a second, because that is an aspect of the show also that kind of deals with, it also has something to do with female friendships, and obviously,
with Deirdre Friel's character,
exactly.
with Greta, that's another great examination in Physical, and they play with the form in Physical. There's like not a lot of rules. Like there's dream sequences, there's voice, there's a lot of her inner turmoil is played out for the audience live, and that I love as a viewer. Like I love when the kind of rules are broken a little bit with narrative storytelling, and that for me was always really fun and exciting to see as each episode would come in. And yeah.
Yeah, in fact, both these shows I feel like break rules in lots of different ways, and Platonic does in the sense that even though the show is Platonic, called Platonic, people are going to think, is there going to be this other thing where they get together? And as we saw in the season finale, there's a beautiful sort of poetry to
there's a bittersweetness at the end, and whether you want to attribute that to them having missed their opportunity but I attribute it to their friendship. And there is, like, when you do break up with a friend, it is really real and it is really painful, and it's like kind of a low-hanging fever you have all the time until you resolve it. And that is something I feel everyone can relate to, and that felt like to your point, a very sort of poignant, bittersweet kind of ending for them, which I felt it was a strong finish in terms of their relationship, and it's a delicate thing, it's hard to tell that part of the story. So I was really proud of those last episodes.
Yeah. It's such a fragile thing. And to wrap up, have you guys talked about, obviously, maybe can't share too much, but what season 2 would sort of have, where the relationship would go, where the friendship would go, because obviously there's going to be changes in both their lives.
There's been, they've already started pitching ideas, but I'm not hanging on to anything. There's a sort of a basic framework, but I think because of the strike, it's all now kind of in full gear. I think everyone couldn't do anything for so long with the writers and then the actors. So now we're finally going to, like, after the new year, really start to, flesh out exactly what it's going to look like. But, I think we all had such fun on the first, and we feel like there's more to tell and more funny stuff. So hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much funny stuff in this first season. Congratulations on it. They are both on Apple TV+.
Thanks for coming. You guys are so sweet. Thanks
ladies and gentlemen, Rose Byrne, and the shows are Physical and Platonic, and both are fantastic.
Guys, have a great happy holidays to everybody. Thank you again for coming.
Rose.